Hey, record living friends, it's Brian from tokyorecordstyle. I have a video that I want to share with you today that has been in the making for a really long time. It's not especially polished and I'm really making it on the fly, but it has been in my mind's eye for months. And it started with a conversation that I had about photography. I'm a photographer, and today's video is about photographic album covers. I went through my collection and I pulled out all the records that I thought had interesting photographic album covers that I could comment on, that I could critique, that I could say what was successful about them or maybe what wasn't successful about them. I made a gajillion notes. I learned it all and forgot it all more times than I can remember. But this stack of records has been staring at me for weeks, and it's time to get this thing through the pipeline. So join me on a rather ambitious video where I am going to talk about some of my noteworthy albums with photographic covers. Now, these albums are in semi-chronological order. They go through time, and they're also a little bit ranked as well. Sort of. So bear with me. It's a little bit of a loose thing, but if you wait until the end, you'll hear what I think is one of the most successful photographic album covers. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting with Meet the Beatles, 1964. This is photographed by Robert Freeman, who did a lot of the first Beatles covers. This is a really iconic portrait of the four boys, and I read about them that I will recap here from my notes that I've written about every record that, of course, you know that this is their second album. This is the blue tinted version, which is a riff on the original black and white version. That was for the Beatles UK album With the Beatles. This is the Japanese version of Meet the Beatles, and it's using the black and white motif and not the blue tinted capital version. They're both kind of interesting. I prefer the stark black and white one, and I don't really necessarily love the blue tinted one. But what's really remarkable is that these portraits are just so great, and they're so iconic, and the boys in sort of half shadow here. On their first album, they weren't very happy with the results, and this was the first one, as George Harrison put it, that they wanted to get involved and get a little artsy with. And so they were inspired by some photos that Astrid Kirchherr took of them earlier in the year in Hamburg, with all of them sort of in half shadow, and as well as some photographs that Robert Freeman had made of John Coltrane, and this was the result. They were in some back alley in Bournemouth, I think, and it looks like it's very conceptual, but Paul mentioned that they just went back into an alley somewhere and boom, 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 boom. They took the four photos. I can't really be sure if it's a composite of the four or if they actually pose like this. I can't imagine that they pose like this, but imagine somehow it got composited together, and Paul said about it, it was very moody. And he said it might look like it took a long time, but Robert went off and made it really quickly, and within an hour he came back and this is what he had. So an incredibly iconic, awesome Beatle. Ringo here was put down in the bottom left-hand corner so as to, or right-hand corner, I guess you'd say, looking at the album, because he was the final member and the smallest member of the Beatles. And it works. It's just a nice balance, and I don't think he's necessarily slighted for being sort of off and to the right here. And the graphic details are really fine and cool, and yeah, I think it's a super successful record cover here. Robert Freeman also did, if you're a big Beatles fan, you already know this, a bunch of Beatle covers, including Hard Day's Night, which I absolutely love. So cool. He did Beatles for Sale. Another awesome one here. This is again on the Japanese version, Odeon label, and they're starting to look a little moppy, you know? Love everything about this. I'm just noticing details that I hadn't even noticed before. That's the back cover of the Japanese version. Are the other versions like that? Love Hard Day's Night. A little more love for Hard Day's Night. That is such an iconic album cover with the four boys making some silly sort of poses almost in silhouette. Really fun. Lots of different expressions. And this is I Should Have Known Better If I Fell in Love with Her. Tell Me Why. And I love her. Really cool picture sleeve Japanese Hard Day's Night. He also did Help, which has these seriforms. I've forgotten what they're called. Nautical poses and that they use in maritime world where these signify certain things that are happening on boats. This was, of course, from the Help movie, and they're looking really cool in their sort of French Vogue fashion styles. And then back here on the beach, they just look great. They all look sort of, unique and different in their own way. Paul's got he's got his muscly shirt on and his belt buckle. Ringo and George are looking a little bit similar with some denim light bluish. I always like to comment on the fashion. Ringo's taken off his probably big chunky sunglasses and his pinky ring, and then John looks like a little bit of a goof with this funny hat that he has, but a really cool picture. Again, cool graphics at the beach, super iconic, timeless photographic image here on this white background. I'm sure they were sort of rotoscoped out of whatever image that they originally were taken against, and to create this really amazing, cool design. My photo volunteering effort, we've spoofed a couple of the Robert Freeman album covers. I'll share one right here. This is my photo volunteer effort called Photo Hoku, and we're riffing on Help. And Robert Freeman also did Rubber Soul, and this record cover has a great story behind it. You'll notice, not necessarily at first glance, but the boys here are kind of elongated out, and maybe you've heard that story. Paul tells he's driving down like the Thames on some like riverboat, and he's telling the story of this record. Rubber Soul is the 6th studio album. It's intended as a pun combining the falseness intrinsic to pop music and rubber-soled shoes. They didn't claim to have the soul of American blues, jazz, and soul music, but they had their own thing. And their frenemies, the Rolling Stones, got called out in an article for being plastic soul and being from the north and where you need a good Wellington boot. They sort of riffed on it and made their own identity, Rubber Soul. And when Robert Freeman made this cover, the story is that he was using a slide projector to project the images that he had just taken, positive film, so that you could actually slide film so that you could see the image, and he was projecting it on a 12 by 12 inch card so that the boys could kind of imagine what it would look like as an album cover. And at one point, the 12 inch card kind of slipped a little bit and the image elongated on the paper, and they were like, "Oh, can we have that? That looks really cool." And it was a really funny moment, and it sort of created this psychedelic vibe, and it solidified their image as burgeoning potheads. And it was the first album cover, if I remember, that didn't have the name of the Beatles on it. It doesn't have the Beatles written on it, although it does have Rubber Soul. And what's noteworthy about this is that the distinctive lettering was created by illustrator Charles Front. His name should have been Charles Font. But he said, if you tap into a rubber tree, you start to get this sort of globule that comes out. And he took that as inspiration to create this very globule-esque Rubber Soul font. And it is said that this font helped make the psychedelic designs of the Flower Power generation more ubiquitous. You saw this kind of style of font all over the swing in London 60s, and maybe it started here with Rubber Soul by Robert Freeman. Super awesome album cover. Okay. Next, we got to go to Abbey Road. Again, kind of chronological order here. I'm leaving all the Beatles with the Beatles. And we got a few more Beatle-y things coming up. You know it. What do I need to say about it? But I will mention, not even the name of the album is mentioned on this one. There was some debate with the creative direction, who was led by John Kosh, and photography by Ian McMillan, and about not putting even the name of the album on the cover. And they said we didn't even need to, because they were the most famous band in the world. They didn't need the name of the band or album on the cover. Of course, you know the story, most recently told from the Get Back series, when they had these ideas of going to the base of Mount Everest to make this photo, and they ended up just doing this performance on the rooftop, and rather than doing this epic pose in front of the Himalayan mountains, they just went out here onto Abbey Road. One thing I kind of didn't notice before is that they're all in step except for Paul. Paul's got his right foot forward where all the other boys have their left foot forward. There was so much that was read into this about Paul being barefoot. The license plate that was on this car was stolen repeatedly after it was on the cover of this album. What more can you say about this super iconic record for the ages? Very few records henceforth will be as iconic as this amazing album cover. And again, in my appreciation and love for Abbey Road, my volunteer project also spoofed this album cover. You can see down at the bottom, it says in the zebra crossing, Photohoku. So check that out, Photohoku. You can see it. Okay, next up, still a little Beatley, we got George Harrison's All Things Must Pass. This is my copy that I bought when I was probably barely 19 years old. And I got it for $9.99, and it's quite tattered, but it's got awesome, iconic, long-haired George here, out here on Friar Park maybe, and the lawn here with the gnomes. And it was said about this album cover, the photography is done by Barry Feinstein and the art direction by Wilkes Camouflage Productions for this 1970 release. Of course, this was George Harrison's statement piece that came right after the Beatles. You know it, I know it, we all love it. It had tastes of where George would be going, you know, hints of Dylan and the band, Delaney and Bonnie, Billy Preston, and all the people that he went on to play with. Leon Russell and the sound of the slide guitar, and this was the album that kicked it all off. And the 4 lawn gnomes that you'll notice here are rather ridiculous. It was said to be a sort of statement of George's leaving the Beatles, leaving behind his old bandmates. I read that John Lennon hated this album cover because it sort of lampooned the Beatles as if being like silly lawn gnomes, and there George was freeing himself of this comedic tragedy that was the end of the Beatles. The stark black and white photo was taken on the main lawn at Friar Park by Barry Feinstein, representing his removal from the Beatles' collective identity. When Feinstein rolled up, he saw the lawn gnomes that had just been delivered to Friar Park that day and how they were scattered across the lawn, and it was his quick thinking that led him to be like, oh, this is the idea, we should do this. Barry Feinstein was also the photographer who took the cover of Dylan's Times Are A-Changing, Dylan in the car smoking cigarettes with all the people at the window. He also took the cover of Pearl, Janis Joplin's Pearl. Taj Mahal, just a little quick shout out to Taj Mahal. This is the self-titled album from 70 that I think preceded Natchel Blues, which is my favorite Taj record, but it seems like it's an homage to George Harrison and All Things Must Pass. He's got a little smattering of lawn characters, although I can't say it's quite as successful as George Harrison's, but a little shout out to George Harrison's influence and Taj Mahal, one of my favorite artists. Next up, we're moving right along to the Stones. This cover is December's Children. It's a collection of songs. It's not exactly an album, maybe something for the US market. The photographer is Gered Mankowitz. Mankowitz was noted for working with Jimi Hendrix, Free, Traffic, Yardbirds, Small Faces, Soft Machine, Slade. The list goes on. Suzi Quatro, Elton John, Kate Bush, Eurythmics, Duran Duran. And he also was famous for Hendrix in the like military garb photos, as well as a bunch of more Stones photos. Between the Buttons, that sort of dreamy one with the sort of lens flare. Some Kate Bush records that are also coming up later on this list. What I like about this photo is the forced perspective here and how they've created something imaginative using constraints. Irving Penn, one of my all-time favorite portrait photographers, used to do this all the time. He would create these big wedges and he would stick people in the middle of the wedges, and it was sort of their constraint, the uncomfortableness of being in that little wedge of panels that would evoke some really interesting photos. And they've done that here, I think, with success. All the boys are very clear and in focus, and it gives a nice negative space for the graphics here. And Mick and Keith and Charlie and Brian and Bill. It's very awesome, cool, on London Records. Yeah, there's my copy of December's Children. Okay, moving along. The Stones again with Exile on Main Street. This is really fun. This is one of my favorite records. I love putting this record on. I love the packaging. I love the inner postcards. I've sent them off around the world. And this photo is from Robert Frank. This was a collection of 2 photographers. The inserts and the front cover and the back cover were made by 2 different photographers. One of them was Norman Seeff and the other was Robert Frank, who famously did The Americans. If you don't know the book, The Americans, a very important photography book, depicted America in an unslightly way in the beatnik generation. The foreword is famously written by Jack Kerouac, and it showed America to itself for the first time. Robert Frank, these photos were incredibly important and groundbreaking, and Robert Frank disappeared for some years into obscurity, but he sort of followed in the idea of Cartier-Bresson's Decisive Moment, and there are tons of really amazing pictures from America. You get to see it, both its decadence and its downtrodden, all in the same book. I love this photo. Actually, I just randomly opened to this. The elevator operator here with this woman who's just demure, and it's sort of soft focus, and you can see maybe somebody here in a fur, what do they call that, shawl. They're going to a party, and she's just maybe the lowly elevator operator who's watching this glamorous world pass her by. And little diners with little TVs. And Robert Frank basically made a photographic version of On the Road, and that is what The Americans is. This photo on the cover of Exile on Main Street is an outtake from the book The Americans. And the story goes that Mick Jagger basically took Norman Seeff out somewhere, and they basically replicated the version with the boys here at some location, and then they used one of the outtakes from The Americans on the cover. And what's really kind of fun is that this photo has some notes about it. Mick Jagger wanted the album that reflected the band as runaway outlaws, using the blues as its weapon against the world. John Van Hammersveld, who was the designer on this project, and his photographer partner Norman Seeff were invited to come create these images on the back, inspired by Robert Frank, who made the cover. And this photo was taken outside of a dingy movie theater in New York City next to a tattoo parlor. And what's noteworthy about it is that it has a few of the circus sideshow players that might have performed on some traveling circus. And one of the photos in this collage of these circus performers is sideshow player Hezekiah Trambles, the Congo jungle freak, that was photographed actually by the recently deceased Dion Airbus, who is also a cool part of this story. So you have Norman Seeff, who did some of the artwork on the back, as well as some of the inserts. I think also the postcards were by Norman Seeff. And you have Robert Frank here on the cover, and a little Dion Airbus as well. Okay, moving along. The Rolling Stones Black and Blue. This you wouldn't think is a great album cover, but actually it is fantastic. This is by Yasuhiro Wakabayashi from 1976. Wakabayashi-san was a famous Japanese fashion photographer, and Keith said about this album that it was the one where they were trying out new guitarists, including Ronnie Wood, who had played on some Stones records in 75, and then in 76, when this record came out, he became an official member of the Stones. They flew to Sanibel Island Beach off of Florida to make this album with Wakabayashi-san, and like, it's cool, man. Look how great it is. They must have had like a shim overhead blocking out the sun, and they used some studio strobes and to create like an outdoor. You can see in the reflection of Mick's irises 2 light sources, right? Can you see that? That's how you can tell what was going on in here. And they must have used some modified light in the bright sunshine. Rolling Stones Black and Blue is getting some praise for its photographic cover. This is going to take forever. Okay, next up is Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde. Now, I know it's not quite chronological order, but we go Beatles, Stones, and we're going to Dylan next. This is from what, 66 maybe? Yeah, 66. You don't own Blonde on Blonde. That's criminal. Don't tell anybody. And of course, this is the gatefold that he's wearing, the brown suit that I think he also wore in the next 2 albums. Look at my ring wear. This is a really cool cover, and why I wanted to mention this one is because it's out of focus. It's very out of focus. Why? Why would you put an out of focus image of an iconic character on one of the best albums of all time? Why would you choose to put this soft focus image on the cover? A lot of people suggested that it was Dylan's idea of being subversive and being a bit insubordinate and being Dylan. It was a cold day in New York, and they went out, and apparently there were other shots made by photographer Jerry Schatzenberg. Shout out to Jerry Schatzenberg. There were other photos in the series that were perfectly sharp, but it was Dylan's choice to go with this one. Now, I just want to say that sharpness doesn't dictate whether a photo is good or not. There's lots of reasons that a photo can be successful in soft focus. Images can have a nuance about them when they're just slightly soft, and when they're tack sharp, sometimes they're a little bit jarring, like a film that's like been over sharpened. Your eyes don't particularly love it. From far away, it might look perfectly sharp, and as you get closer, it changes. And so there's a lot of depth and interest that you can create with a slightly soft focus image, and hairs do interesting things, and you can start to see actually the gradients of where the image started and where it ended. A blurry photo might come from the camera shaking as you take it. The shutter may be open for a little bit longer, and it's moved a little bit, and the light that's come in to hit the film has actually moved across the plane of the film, and it's created this blur effect. It's either from like a too slow of a shutter speed or from camera movement, but it's not always a bad thing. Ian Stravonius, who I love and respect, says that life is prettier in soft focus. I think Bob Dylan did it right here with this soft focus image of Blonde on Blonde. I can tell you also about it that he's wearing this suede jacket that he also wore in his next two albums, John Wesley Harding and Nashville Skyline. Oh, the interior is also filled with photographs. I totally forgot to mention this. This was probably an outtake from that same session. And this photo is noteworthy because one of you will know better than me. There was a shot in the original version of this. I think this is a re-release with actress Claudia Cardinale. She objected to her photograph being in the album, and so the record was re-released with a different inner image collage. And rather than having her photo in the series, Dylan took a photo of her and then put it in the inner sleeve here, which somehow made it okay. Dylan just being Dylan. I love these images. I love the long panoramic. Even though parts of the scenes are cut off, they are still great for storytelling. Is this Serge Gainsbourg? I don't know who this is on the back. It looks like Serge. Don't tell anybody you don't know Blonde on Blonde. Don't worry. It's gonna be okay. Okay, I don't know who did the photograph of this one, but I love this one of Charlie Mingus. Better Get Your Soul. And I just pulled it out because also it succeeds with the vertical gatefold with him playing the double bass here. Who did it first? I'm not sure. I'm guessing it must have been Dylan. But how cool is that? With those awesome shades and this incredibly cool inside image. Nice, Mingus. Looking cool, dude. I have a feeling there are a million things that I will have wished I would have said when I mentioned these records, and they're just skipping my mind as I'm talking about them. But this is the record that spurred this video. This is Simon & Garfunkel's Bookends by Richard Avedon, which I had a debate with Mazzy from the VC about this being a miss photo, this being not the iconic photo that we all think that it is. And the reason that I think that is because Paul here in the foreground is tack sharp. His eyelashes are in focus, and Art back here is just ever so slightly out of focus. Now, I just told you that having an out of focus photo is okay, but in this context, it does not work. I think Avedon flubbed this photo. I found out that Avedon was 40-something in this photo. He had had over 2 decades to master his craft, and I don't doubt that he knew what he was doing. But from my experience being in the studio and going fast and trying to keep people going and without moving too much and everybody's comfortable and going for it, you miss photos and you get back to the editing booth and you say, oh God, oh God, oh God, maybe that one's okay. Oh God, maybe I didn't get it. Oh God, maybe we have to do it again. And then, okay, that one's probably will pass. And I think that this photo, Avedon snuck it past all of us. And I don't think it's that great of an image. It's a great pose. It's beautifully exposed and printed, but the fact that Art here is just ever so soft does not work juxtaposed on Paul tack sharp. It's a slight to Art. What I guess happened is that Avedon shot this on a large format camera, and he had the swing and tilt of the camera to use, and he did not set it properly. It's a lot of little variables to switch up, and he should have put both of these guys in focus. If it has eyes, focus on the eyes. And you've got 2 eyes in focus and 2 eyes very out of focus. And this photo could have had both Simon and Garfunkel tack sharp in focus had Avedon slowed down just a little bit and worked on the photo a little bit better. And I think we would have had a more successful photo. I love the pose. I love the album. I'm a big fan of Avedon, but I think from experience that this is a B photo. This is not an A+ photo. I know it goes down in our minds as one of the most iconic photographic images of all time, but I got debated about why this is such a great image, and I said technically it's not. It's just not. And I'm going to tell you why. In fact, I'll tell you why all of my albums that have photographic covers are good or bad. So Avedon, sorry bud, but this one doesn't pass mustard for me. Of course, this features the songs America, Old Friends, Mrs. Robinson, which was made famous by The Graduate, and it conveys Paul and Art here as being introspective and mature, and yeah, you can see it in their eyes, but they're just out of focus, and it puts one of more importance and one of less importance, and I don't think it respects Art and Paul as a two-piece. I just don't think it does. So, of course, this was also spoofed a bunch of times, and most recently by the duo Kruder and Dorfmeister. They paid homage to this by making a really great tribute to this album cover, but there it is. This is the album that sparked my interest in this topic and this video. So what do you think? Take a good look at your copy and then leave a comment below and we'll get a discussion going. Okay, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars by David Bowie. Is this a great album cover? Is this even a photographic album cover? Actually, it is. It's a black and white photo that has been hand colored, and I love these hand colored images. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it has to do with that it feels like a black and white photo, but it also feels like a color photo, and I just think that is super crazy. The colors here are oversaturated and vibrant. It feels like a hand-colored image, and this, of course, is the image that they had to make. I think the whole band was sick, and David Bowie just agreed to go outside and do a quick photo with the photographer Brian Ward in 1971. They went out here to this famous fur maker shop called K West. The K in K West stands for Mr. Cohn, who opened this shop on the west end of London, and they were not very pleased to find their shop initially on the cover of this album, but soon as people flocked to have their photo made here, slowly but surely they grew to understand and appreciate that they were on this iconic album cover, and there was all this deep wonder about whether K West was some kind of quest that Ziggy Stardust was actually on. So it's very fun, and sadly this shop went away and the sign went away, and everybody was a little bit bummed out because nobody knows where the sign ended up. And it says here on the back of this record, which I really love, another cool hand-painted image, to be played at maximum volume. One of the really cool parts of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. The rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Another one in soft focus I just wanted to point out. This photographer, we have no credit for this photographer, but you can see from the chains here, right here at the top, it doesn't quite seem like it's in soft focus. It looks kind of dreamy, but it's only here when you look at maybe the spikes on his choker or on his bracelet here, the buckles. You can see how far the lens moved in the shot, and it's successful. It works. Even though it's blurry, it totally is successful and works as an image. Back here on the back, it looks like that they've used some kind of filter to create some sort of soft focus effect, and there's some lens filters that will create these sort of star shapes. And so this is Japanese pressing, and the back cover here is also really cool. From Rock and Roll Animal, which has a bunch of Velvet songs on it. Lou Reed, Rock and Roll Animal. Okay, next up, Hot Rats from Frank Zappa. Awesome, killer record. The first one, I think, without the mothers. 1969, maybe? Yep. Abigail DeVoe, awesome YouTube channel, did an incredible video, not only on Hot Rats and Frank Zappa, but on Miss Christine of the GTOs, who is featured here on the cover. This is made with infrared film. You can't see infrared light. It's on the light spectrum, but our human eyes do not pick up infrared waves. But the film that was used to make this image can see infrared rays, and trees are beaming with infrared light. And infrared light is surrounding us all over the place, but it's only if we use infrared detecting devices or infrared film can we see this really interesting pink and reddish hued film. They create these sort of alien landscapes that are really cool. The photographer on Hot Rats was Andy Nathanson, and again, the model was Christine Fricka, alias Miss Christine of the GTOs. This has been called a movie for your ears. I love that idea. My only critique about Hot Rats is that the back cover is the same as the front cover. That's a big no-no. Give me another image. I will say that you do get the full image, and the infrared aspect of the image starts to even seem more prominent. So that is kind of cool. Cool pose, some interesting storytelling here, as if she's like a hot rat coming out of the sewer. Kind of conceptual. Frank Zappa's Hot Rats. Okay, next up is David Farrell photographs Ravi Shankar here in this really cool in-shadow image of him here playing his sitar. David Farrell was an interesting photographer who I didn't know about. I read about him. The Second World War interrupted his studies, and in 1940 he enlisted in the Royal Air Force, and he was a pilot with the Bomber Command. Eventually he came back after the war and married his teenage sweetheart and became an amateur singer, and he decided to leave his career as a solo violinist to become a self-taught photographer. These are the kinds of people that are photographing the album covers that we love. His daughter mentioned about him in a short biography that he ended up retiring to the countryside and photographed a lot of rich people's kids and the whole hunting fraternity. He became a very in-demand photographer among the country set. David Farrell ended up becoming friendly with Yehudi Menuhin, a famous violinist I don't know well, Ravi Shankar, Jacqueline Dupree, Louis Armstrong, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Albert Finney, Julie Christie, Laurence Olivier, Ralph Richardson, among others. He took the notion from Henri Cartier-Bresson's humanitarian photography as his model, and he specialized in portraits in informal contexts. He imitated the French genius famed invisibility. He probably was a bit of a wallflower at dinner parties and happenings where he just was snapping quietly in the background and probably created some very candid and special, honest, authentic moments. Menuhin, this famous violinist, who he met at the Bath Music Festival in 1955, became another friend for life, and he claimed that David Farrell created the visual equivalent of his own musical achievements. I love that thought. Creating a visual equivalent to another's musical achievements. Very, very cool. He used digital photography. He only died not so long ago, and his daughter helped him sort of transition from film, and she said about him that he had so many anecdotes from hanging out with rock stars and movie stars that he never needed to repeat himself. He was also a terrible archivist, leaving behind rooms filled with boxes of original prints. On one rare occasion of a clear out, he filled a bunch of trash bags, mistakenly throwing out all his early Beatles photos. They were duly removed by the dustman. David Farrell sounds like somebody I would want to know. Photographed Ravi Shankar here. And, this photograph is really cool. Typically, you don't photograph somebody from below and up. It's not always the most flattering angle to photograph, like a nice portrait of somebody. You want to typically shoot them at eye level, but this is a case where it's done really successful. The sitar is here in the foreground. Ravi Shankar looks quite statuesque here playing his sitar, and in this case, shooting from below up makes this photograph really successful. Also, you'll see this halo of light on the top of his hair that's coming from behind him. You don't notice it, but there's light that's coming on the side of his face over on this side, and then there's another light that's separating him from the background. That's what makes this photo really easy to look at. If it didn't have this little halo, this backlight, he would just kind of disappear into the background and it wouldn't really work. And that's why they say there's separation between the background, is because there's a hair light that separates him from just an otherwise disappearing into the blackness of the photo. So, well done, David Farrell. Next up, Miles Davis in A Silent Way. You'll notice on the very dark background, the glare is really coming out from the light, and I'm going to get called out for, why did you leave them all in the shrink? Well, they're still getting a little bit of glare without the shrink, but I just have too many to take them all out of the shrink, but I will try better to take the ones out that need to be taken out. This one you wouldn't think is necessarily a great photo. There is not very much separation that separates Miles here from the background. He almost just fades off into the background. There's a tiny bit that you can see. That might actually even be ringwear. That is ringwear. That's not even him. But it kind of works. It kind of is okay. There's enough detail and interest on his face and in his expression to make it successful, I think. There is a lot of expression here on his forehead, and you'll notice that in his eyes, he has a catchlight. That's what that little mark is called, a catchlight. A catchlight is what gives the subject life. If you don't have a catchlight in the eye that would normally come from the sun or come from a light that's above our head, I probably have some catchlights in my eyes right now. It's what makes us look alive. And when we don't have catchlights in our eyes, we look dead, or we look kind of scary. Sometimes we'll get a catchlight in one eye and not in the other, but in this image we get two really nice catchlights. Not as easy as you might think. And it probably was not a very easy photo to expose. It was obviously made on film, considering the time. It probably took some darkroom magic to get this nice tonal difference here between Miles's really dark toned skin and the dark background. But I think it's really successful. I wonder what's going on with this blue coat. There's a couple of different versions of this. Some of them are slightly lighter exposed, but this is my version here. Probably a repress. The photographer is Lee Friedlander, a very of-note photographer. This, of course, is Miles's 1969 album where he's venturing into his electric period. I don't really quite hear that in this. This is the Miles that is kind of my home place, my back to zero point. This is probably my first Miles record. It was a little bit controversial in that it sort of marked this period where he started shifting into fusion. Still, it's considered one of his most influential works. And about Friedlander, he's an American photographer from the 60s and 70s, and you can find lots of books about Friedlander. He evolved into an influential and often imitated photographer with a visual language of urban social landscape. He's often depicts life in urban contexts, that there's lots happening and lots to look at, and you're not quite sure if the subject is the building in the background, the people in the foreground, the action that's happening on the right side of the frame. It's the whole thing. His work is characterized by innovative use of framing and reflection. You'll often see like lots of layers of depth, not depth this way, but depth this way. So very cool that he photographed the cover of In a Silent Way. Friedlander for the win. Okay, another close-up image that might pay tribute to In a Silent Way is Roberta Flack's second album, Chapter 2. I love this image. Look at the tonality of this beautiful image with all the gradients of her cheeks and her nose and the black to white and all the beautiful tonality and gradation moving from right to left. And in this case, I'm eating my own words here. There are no catchlights in either of her eyes. There's a little bit in this one, but you can see the whites of her eyes and they create some interesting shapes. And juxtaposed here on the lines of her nose and her beautiful features, and actually the ringwear. When you think of Roberta Flack, you think of her giant afro. And even though that is not what this is, it works really well here. I think we can actually make out her afro a bit. And it's really intimate. It's a really intimate photo, and you can just make out her lips here and just make out her cheek. And whoever worked on this in the darkroom, forgive me, photographer Jack Robinson, and art direction by Ira Friedlander. I wonder any relation to Lee Friedlander, who made this photograph for Atlanta Records in 1970. Worked really hard in the darkroom to probably create all of these tones, all of the shadow here on the right side and the very gentle gradient tonality here that we see all over. I love this photo. And I love this album. The first track on here, Reverend Lee, such a groovy tune. I love playing that one at this set. Robinson was a freelance photographer for Vogue and for the New York Times from the 50s to the early 70s before he left New York to become a stained glass designer. He moved to the South and abandoned his career as a very famous photographer and pursued a career in making stained glass. I need to check out his stained glass work. I haven't seen it yet. He was one of the leading fashion portrait photographers in the world, and I don't know his name. He photographed along some very famous photographers, and Newsweek magazine covered a show, a retrospective of a big feature that spotlit photographers Avedon, Irving Penn, Steichen, and Jack Robinson. So he's up there with the legends and regarded as one of the best amongst his contemporaries. He had exclusive access to actors and movie stars and athletes and politicians and socialites, and he worked really hard for Vogue. And maybe if I had read those old Vogue magazines, I would have found his credit in lots of the photos. So I'm going to go out and look for his name. He made lots of classic, timeless Vogue covers that we probably all already know. He also photographed Nina Simone, Jack Nicholson, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Leonard Cohen, Tina Turner, Joni Mitchell, Cher, Elton John, Michael Caine, Ralph Lauren, and Andy Warhol. And Roberta Flack. Are you having fun? Is this boring? Maybe it is, but it's getting me off. I just love photography, and it's fun to talk about music in a photographic way. Another successful close-up, Dionne Warwick. I just like this. This one has been blown up. It starts to fall apart. You can start to see the film grain kind of come in, and it's losing a lot of its sharpness. It was probably just a little tiny postage stamp part of a much bigger negative, but it works. With some darkroom mastery, this is the kind of thing that you can make. Again, a lot of tonality, and I love film grain. It's got such a beautiful texture. You can see it in her face here, and you can see it in the background, the sensitive sound of Dionne Warwick. Some cool photos on the back here as well. Most of the images that you will see in this series are portraits of people's faces. I love a portrait, but it begs the question a little bit, what is a portrait? I'm not prepared to really answer that question, but I think it is an image of something that conveys its essence. Not necessarily always a face, but in most cases, here I think we find something that I'm not sure if we're going to call this a portrait, but I think it's successful photography. There's something featured so prominently here, and there's so much character and storytelling going on here that I feel like it constitutes as a portrait. There'll be other images in my collection that also don't quite follow the standard tenets of portraiture. This is one of them. Sonny Clark, jazz pianist with Art Farmer, Jack McLean, Paul Chambers, Philly Joe Jones on Blue Note. This is a repress, and the photo is by Francis Wolff. I don't have a ton of information about this album cover, but I like it. It's on the street. You can tell that the photographer got down on the ground to make this photograph. This is not a photograph you make standing up. You actually have to not only kneel down, you have to get the camera all the way down, and that puts you in the photographer's eye, which is really interesting. I read that the photographer Francis Wolff, this was his wife. He asked his wife to strut down the road in a cool way and snap this great photo of her. And it's just awesome. These black pumps and these lovely slender legs, and you can kind of see the bend of the leg, and it implies there's quite a sort of constrained skirt, one of those sort of pencil type skirts that the girls used to wear. And you can tell the era by the double-breasted jacket here on the passerby and this cool old car, and maybe some old taxis over here on the streets of New York. There's a lot going on in this photo, and there's some action, there's some movement, it's dynamic. The graphic design on it is also really cool and complements the black and white photo. Super, super successful. Elliot Erwitt, who I'm going to talk a little bit about later, he famously got down on the streets of New York and made a lot of photos like this from this very, very low angle. And it's fun, you know, it's an explorative way to use photography. I encourage you, be inspired by Francis Wolff and maybe put your camera in some angle that you don't normally put it, maybe down here at the very bottom of the street, and see what you can come up with. Sonny Clark, cool strutting. Another from my jazz collection. I didn't find out who the photographer is on this, but it's Elvin Jones and Richard Davis, drums and bass, heavy sounds. with both of the gentlemen smoking cigarettes here with these clouds of smoke circling around their head, creating a really ambient, vibey jazz club sense. Super successful. What's helping to create this very smoky effect is the light coming from behind, right? You don't see any light on their face, or just a little tiny bit that's maybe skating right across the bridge of his nose to catch his other eye here with a little bit of light, but all of the light is coming from behind and it's illuminating the smoke and making a really interesting, cool photo. This is what photographers think about. This is what I think about. I think about light. Whenever I look at a photo, I'm thinking, where is the light? Where is the light coming from? Is it coming from the side? Is it coming from below? Is it coming from above? Our eyes tend to like light that comes from above, where we always tend to see it. It doesn't really like light that comes from below. It looks very unflattering and unnatural, but it can come from any direction. And in this case, it's coming from behind and above. You can kind of see, and they've probably at the end of their film roll, and he's saying, just a few more, just a few more. And their boys here are saying, we're out of cigarettes. Come on, man, hurry up and take the picture. We got jazz to play. Great cover. No details on the photographer on this one. Okay, I will try to remove all the plastic henceforth. I admit, it looks a lot better. I'm reaching into my Japanese records here for this release. I think the first by jazz vocalist and Japanese blues legend, Asakawa Maki. This photograph was made by her longtime collaborator Jin Tamura. Asakawa Maki has been called the queen of the underground, Angira no Jo, the voice of Japan's urban counterculture. She has a very deep, brooding, almost tortured voice, and she's been compared to Mahalia Jackson, obviously inspired by Billie Holiday. She got famous on US bases and adjacent towns playing very cool jazz clubs, and that's where she first made a name for herself. And her longtime collaborator, Jin Tamura, who made this photo, is credited with helping her shape her visual identity. All of her album covers have these black and white, tormented, poetic feeling in them. Let's give credit to Jun Tamura for helping to create that identity for Asakawa Maki, because that is what she represents. So it can really go to show you that a collaboration with a visual artist can really help establish you as a musical one. So I think this is a really interesting collaboration. Very moody and almost film noir inspired. I don't think Tamura-san, the photographer, did much work outside of working with Asakawa Maki. I know that in '72 he put out a photo book of images of her called The World According to Asakawa Maki. We just call her Maki. Maki is her first name. Asakawa, I think, is her last name. But he did put out a book in '72 called The World According to Asakawa Maki, which had lots of behind-the-scenes pictures of her, a broader collection of portraits that exemplifies their collaborative nature. Gotta show you the back cover too, right? So demure. Asakawa Maki. Next up, my favorite Japanese band, Happy End. This is their third and kind of final studio record with the title Happy End here in English. This was recorded in LA with Van Dyke Parks and Lowell George. And the story is that Hosono showed up at the studio and said to the boys, hey, give me that California sound. Working on other projects at the time, they refused them until a briefcase was open and they were presented with stacks of $100 bills. They finally agreed. Hosono said that it wasn't really a great experience and that Van Dyke Parks was pretty much drunk the entire recording session, that while it was productive, it wasn't really a great recording session, and they got lectured, the Japanese boys, by the American ones about Pearl Harbor and about Japan, and ended up having a bit of a falling out in the end. But they did create this really great record, and this is the one that has Sayonara America, Sayonara Nippon, and it's the one where they just felt disillusioned by their image of what America was, and also not really fitting in their native Japan, and that's when they declared themselves a completely independent entity. And it also brought the band to an end. This was their last album. I wish I could tell you a little bit about the cover. It says here that the design and layout was by Workshop Moo, who I don't know anything about, and the photographer is Masahiro Nogami. And it seems like it's some kind of commercial photography from the 1950s selling some glamorous lipstick or makeup or some high society affair. I'm not sure if this photo was made for this album, but it's got that glossy, plasticky 1950s Mad Men advertising kind of vibe. But I love it. It's really nice. And it's so vibrant. And her cheeks are so pink. And her teeth are so white. And her eyes are so blue. And they're so smitten on each other. And the yellow background is just, it's really iconic. With the Happy End logo here. How cool is that? Love this one. Back jacket leaves a little bit to be desired. Happy End's third album, Happy End, self-titled, but in Romaji. Pay no attention that this is being recorded several days later, but I just made the connection that Masahiro Nogami is Mike Nogami, who was one of Hosono's best buddies from back in college. And when you look at Happy End Records, many, if not all of the photos that are made on those records are made by Mike Nogami, including the photos that were on the seminal classic Kaze Mache Roman, which has the tune Kaze o Atsumete, and this cool picture of Hosono-san that somebody recently showed me and I had never seen before, and I knew exactly what it was when I saw it. It is a tribute to Larry Clark and his famous book, Tulsa, one of the most interesting and controversial books in photographic history from my hometown, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Larry Clark, a very provocative photographer who was said to have been kicked out of the state. His amazing work, Tulsa, a really interesting book worth checking out. Mike Nogami, who was inspired by Tulsa and Tokyo Connection. I love it. Next up, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Dallas Taylor and Greg Reeves. The iconic record Deja Vu, which has this photographic family album textured cover here with the embossed gold lettering and this sort of cut corner photograph of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young and Dallas Taylor and Greg Reeves. Now somebody help me out here, because I know this is like one of the greatest albums of all time. I think the second record of theirs. Who are Dallas Taylor and Greg Reeves? And I don't mind them on this album, but what are we doing here? Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and Dallas Taylor and Greg Reeves, and this photo of this corny, old-timey, Old West sepia motif photo with the dog and the guns and the silly costumes. This is not cool, I think. This is over the top. This Atlanta logo here. Sorry, I cannot get on board with this album cover. I'm sorry. This is the epitome of uncool. Trying too hard. The back here is empty. The interior is not too bad. It's got decent images, but then it has this sort of modern digital text here in the liner notes, which totally does not work with the old-timey script writing here. This old English script. It's just like, it's all wrong. All wrong. Somebody correct me. Tell me how I'm wrong about this. This sort of swirly, weird background motif. It's like psychedelic. It's trying to be too many things at the same time. It's this Old West cowboys and Indians thing. This digital copy here. The images here are not bad. It's just too much. It's just too much. And I mean, like, what's going on here? All the boys trying to look like I'm just not into it. I'm not into Deja Vu. This is a failure, in my opinion. Tell me how I'm wrong. Leave a comment here. The photographer is Harry Diltz and Tom Gundelfinger, who I think were quite cool dudes. And he went on to make lots and lots of album covers for Neil Young. They became like great pals. And I think this was like the first of their collaborations together. Art direction was by Gary Burden. I think he's the one who's guilty of this. Although I went on to learn that Gary Burden was like a famous art director and who made a lot of successful album covers. Henry Stanford Diltz, who I think is the photographer behind this, he was not only a photographer, but he was also a musician, and he played with the Modern Folk Quartet, and he also played on some Monkees records. He was the official photographer at Woodstock and Monterey Pop Festival, Miami Pop Festival, and he photographed over 200 album covers. Okay, staying on topic here, I'm bringing in After the Gold Rush by Neil Young to the mix, which was also designed and art direction led by Gary Burden. That's who Neil Young collaborated with for years and years. It wasn't necessarily Diltz, the photographer. It was Gary Burden who worked on this. The photographer here was Joel Burdenstein. And what's noteworthy about this image is that it's solarized. You'll note that Neil Young's face is kind of in this bizarre sort of alien almost shadow here. This is called solarization, and it's a very strange darkroom technique which happens when you shine a light through the negative and onto the photographic paper and then turn the lights on and then turn them off briefly and solarize the image. And what happens is this strange sort of push and pull of the exposure. I can't actually explain it. I don't really understand exactly what happens, but the highs become low and the lows become high, and it gets flip-flop for a moment, and you can create this effect called solarization. Man Ray was famous for using it. I love it, actually. It's really cool, but apparently this was just a snap made on the street, and when they got back, they were hoping to use one of these images for the album cover. This one was good, I guess, but apparently Neil was out of focus, and to compensate for the soft focus, the photographer, Joel Burdenstein, decided to solarize the image. It's kind of cool. This woman coming out of his back, I'm not so sure, but A-, I'm going to say. The back jacket here has these jeans that have Neil's girlfriend or wife at the time. She sewed all these patches onto him, which he commented on that he really loved and that he cherished and that he wished that he still had all these patches. But come on, dude. Putting a photo of your ass on the back cover of your album, it's a little bit over the top, don't you think? But this image, that's the one. With him sitting here on the couch with guitars strewn out all over the place, a Fender bass, an acoustic guitar, Gibson 336 or whatever that thing's called, some old like plastic beer cups and pictures here on the wall, maybe backstage somewhere. This is a supremely cool behind the scenes shot. I love this. This is really what makes the album. I first met Gary Burden while shooting Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young's cover for Deja Vu, my initial album with Crosby, Stills & Nash, which I just showed you. And I became good friends, and we immediately worked together on the album cover for After the Gold Rush. Dun, 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 dun. I loved what he did, and I have done a great majority of my album art, my ads, and my songbooks with him. He's one of my closest compadres. We are doing our life's work together, says Neil Young about his collaborator, Gary Burden, the art director on this project. Not the photographer, but the art director. Okay, next up is Prime, the best of John Prine. And if you look carefully, you will notice that this album cover is comprised of individual photographic slides. Now, if you're of a certain age, you definitely know what a slide is, but if you're of another particular age, you may have no clue what a slide is. Now, when you're shooting with film photography, you're typically shooting with negative film. It might be black and white negative, it might be color negative, but it's negative film, and the image that ends up on the negative is actually the inverse of what we see in front of us. It's blacks are whites and whites are black, and it's all inverted. And when you go into the darkroom and you put these little negatives in the enlarger, that's like a projector and sends light down onto a table where you have photographic paper, the image suddenly becomes re-inverted and you can print an actual positive of the image. This is positive film. It comes out of the camera not in a negative way, but in a positive way. And some people call it positive film, some people call it slide film, because you can take these film slides and you can put them in a slide projector and project them on a wall like a movie projector. With positive film or slide film, or sometimes called reversal film, you can actually see the image. And that's how we used to look at old slides. And there would be these carousels and you'd put the slides in, ka-chink, ka-chink. You guys remember, ka-chink, ka-chink. And the next picture would come and these carousels would rotate around and the slide would drop down into the little movie theater projector, and then the image would show, and then, you know, it has really cool machines. Anyway, this is a collection of slides. These are the little plastic things that they put inside. The reversal film went inside the slide. You had this done at the lab. And this is an ink pen that you might circle around the best image of the lot. You would write on them and you might see some numbers and some reference numbers and dates. This is a really interesting idea for an album cover, and it's certainly of the photographic theme. And some of the names of the songs are here are written on the slides. Hello in There, Sweet Revenge, Illegal Smile. Here's the image that we like that we circled with the ink pen. And it was said about this album, which I'm so happy to have. Somebody turned me on to John Prine, and I might not have otherwise come to love and appreciate John Prine if it weren't for the insistence that I get this greatest hits album. But the photograph here is David Garr, who photographed a lot of albums. You will definitely know David Garr's work. In fact, I probably either already mentioned him or will mention him again. And the art direction here is by Abby Sussman and Bob Defrin. So I think they did a really interesting idea here with all the slides. No one associated with John Prine was aware that this album was coming out. It was one of these things that the label did, Atlantic, and I heard that they got snuck in late at night to the offices where the art direction was happening, John Prine and his mates, just so they could make sure that the album cover wasn't that bad. And David Garr, about the photographer, he was an American photographer and he enlisted in the U.S. Army one day after Pearl Harbor. So he was a very patriotic guy, and he served in the infantries in Europe, and he was one of the American soldiers who helped liberate the concentration camps. And he came back to the States, and he became one of the preeminent photographers of American folk and blues and jazz and rock musicians from the 1960s and beyond. He did some iconic covers, and I'm going to mention a couple of them coming up, and one of them I'll mention is a couple of really great Bruce Springsteen records. So he's photographed everybody from Bowie, Clapton, Springsteen, Dylan, Miles, Lennon, Warhol, Janis. It goes on and on. He was at all the music festivals, all the jazz festivals, folk festivals, country festivals, and he even photographed Phish, one of my favorite bands, Phish. I'm wearing my Phish shirt today. He even photographed Phish. Photography by David Garr. Backstage All Access Pass is how you get photos like these. John Prine at backstage at all the festivals he might have played back in the day. Oh, he's already getting mentioned again. Springsteen's The Wild, The Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. This beautiful close-up of Bruce. Look how intimate that photo is. And he looks so cool with his furrowed eyebrow and pensive expression. And the back jacket? David Garr. And the back jacket? Look how cool the E Street Band is. Good grief. Well done, David Garr. Look how awesome they look. Barefoot on the street. Boots, shirts unbuttoned, tank top. Rock and roll. It's so supremely cool. David Garr for the win. Okay, next up is Carole King's Tapestry from 1971 on A&M Records, made by A&M staff photographer Jim McCrary. Now, why I wanted to mention this record is because you'll see Carole King here sitting in her Laurel Canyon home holding a tapestry, which is also kind of featured here in the design of the back cover. You can just barely make it out. There's a tapestry here. The tapestry that's shown actually here in the gatefold that she made. Maybe it's of her Laurel Canyon home and some of her recording mates, and here on this really cool tapestry motif. But here on the cover, an image that you probably know all too well. She's sitting here on this lovely ledge right next to this kind of almost bay-style window. And it's flooding the room with light and across her face. And sometimes when you want to make a really nice portrait of somebody and you're looking for some good light, sometimes the best light is right there in a window. Just get up next to a window and the glass will just soften the direct sunlight and it will flood the room with soft light, just like it is doing here for Carole King. You don't have to look very far for great light, and sometimes the best portraits are made in windows just like this. And this is a super successful photo for that reason. Another reason it's really successful is because we have her lovely cat here in the foreground sitting on this pillow. We go through the image this way. We're going deep within the image. And after we pass the cat here in the foreground, we meet Carole King's feet here with her bell-bottom blue jeans. And then we go up and notice the tapestry on her. And then we go over the light that's really glowing her knee here. And we go up to her shiny hair. And then we can go back here into the end of the room. There's a little bit of storytelling here, even though it's just a gal sitting in her window. But there's a really successful portrait here. And it didn't take a whole lot of effort to make this photo. It just took, let's go over by the window, you sit in the window, we'll let the light flood right across your face, and I'll put the camera right over here, and this is where we'll take the photo, and bang, you get an album cover that's for the ages, a timeless image that everybody knows, and as simple as can be. So Carole King by Jim McCrary on A&M Records from 1971. Great photo. Okay, we're at album 30 and there's 30 more to go, and I'm deciding that I'm gonna throw in the towel on this edition, and it will be the first of two. I am going to end it on another portrait that kind of bends the rules of portraiture, because it's not of a person, but it's of a building. Sometimes inanimate objects like buildings, car faces, a tree, a flag can be portrayed in portraiture. And for Led Zeppelin's awesome 1975 release, Physical Graffiti, they've made a beautiful portrait of a building. And this building is a beautiful brownstone, I think is what we call these, or a walk-up. There's actually 4 stories here in the cover, and one story was actually cut out to fit the square format of the image. This was made by a team of artists, art directors, and photographers. I'm going to name them. Art direction was led by Peter Corriston, and photography was done by Elliot Erwitt, P.B. Fallon, Roy Harper, and tinting extraordinaire, who did this incredible sepia kind of tint on it, Maurice Tate. And the window illustrations that you will see both on the front and back covers in this die-cut, amazing, probably super expensive album was by David Hefferman. This was a double album, and it was the first one on their new label, Swan Song, and it may have been the first recorded at Headley Grange, where the levee break drum beat comes from. There's so much going on. You have Physical Graffiti. It has the poster inside of it. You can either have the windows with nothing on them or with the words Physical Graffiti. Interesting kind of poster. All the band members, Marilyn Monroe, some Renaissance paintings, some futuristic things, maybe Gandhi and some horses and astronauts and fighters and comedians and people of note and history are all featured here in the windows. It's just a masterpiece. It's a really, really cool idea and cool concept. I consider this a portrait of a building. I don't know how much better you could do than this. This is the face of this building. Let me read you a few things about Phys Griff. The album designer Peter Corriston was looking for a building that was symmetrical, with interesting details, and was not obstructed by other objects. That was key. He had to find this building amongst many, and without trees right there on the sidewalk blocking the view, and that would fit into a square album cover. He subsequently came up with the rest of the cover based based on an idea of people moving in and out of a tenement with various sleeves that could be placed under the main cover and filling up the windows with various pieces of information. Really cool conceptual idea. The 2 5-story buildings, there's 2 buildings here, right? The 2 5-story buildings that were photographed for the album cover are at 96 and 98 St. Mark's Place in New York City. The original photograph underwent a number of tweaks to arrive at the final image. The 4th floor of the building had to be cropped out to fit the square album cover format. Some other noteworthy characters that you will see here pictured on the windows when you slide the inner sleeves in and out of the outer sleeve are Lee Harvey Oswald, W.C. Fields, Buzz Aldrin, Pope Leo VIII, and others. So the photography here was done by one of my most favorite photographers, Elliott Erwitt. Elliott Erwitt embodies everything that I love about photography, a way to connect with the world beyond us. It's my access point. It's my secret backstage pass that gets me to all kinds of interesting places and people. I love Elliott Erwitt because every emotion of life can be seen in his photos, from reportage to fine art to even to his alter identity, Andre S. Solidor. You got to check out Andre S. Solidor. I had the great privilege of meeting Elliott Erwitt once, and I brought my book with me to meet, and he's signed it here. Me to Brian. Cheers. Elliott Erwitt, Tokyo, April 21st, 2009. So how cool is that one of my favorite photographers made the cover of one of my favorite Led Zeppelin albums? That is just so cool. I love this idea of photography intersecting with music, and it's been a thrill to get to share with you these 30 so far album covers that are photographic in nature, and talk to you about what I think has been successful about some of them and not so successful in others. Did you find that fun? I hope so. Well, stay tuned for part 2, because there's another 30 records that I want to share, but I won't make you endure another super long rambling here. But just note that it starts with a little hypnosis. It's gonna get really interesting, so be sure to tune in for part 2, coming soon to a theater near you. If you like this video, I would really appreciate you giving me a sub if you're not already subbed up, and leave a comment on what you think about some of these covers. Am I wrong? Am I right? What do you think? I love photography and I love music, and I would love to get a conversation going about the two in the comments. We have 2 videos to ramble on about photography and music together, so thank you for indulging me and letting me smash together 2 of my passions, 2 of my creative endeavors, and it's really fun and a thrill to get to talk about them. These are just the albums in my collection. I'm sure there's lots more great photographic album covers in your collection that I don't have in mind that you could easily talk about. So I encourage you to maybe make a video about your favorite photographic album cover. But stay tuned, because as I said, these are in kind of chronological order, and they're kind of also ranked. When we get closer to the end, I'm going to tell you some of the best and some of the worst photographic album covers. So thank you, and stay tuned for part 2. And until next time, I will see you at the record store. Bye.